Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the Valley Experience podcast, an Arizona sports podcast that dives into the diehard fandom of two Arizona sports fans. I'm Ryan Pasiecznik, he's Logan Lober. And Logan, we've had a lot of incredible news surrounding Arizona sports this entire week. Lots to get into, and I'm super excited to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. Thank you to everyone who tuned into our first episode, followed us on all of our social media accounts, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all that stuff. So thank you guys for listening to episode one. Excited to be back for episode two. We got just as much stuff to talk about in this one.
We most certainly do. And we are going to lead off today's show with news that actually dropped on Wednesday. And that is the rumors that were circulating around Suns point guard Chris Paul. According to Chris B. Haynes of TNT, he was the first to report that the Suns were looking to waive Chris Paul. But then further reports by Shams Charania and Woj said that the Suns were not looking to waive Chris Paul, that they were only having conversations about him potentially waiving him and discussing all other options to see what he can do to stay with the franchise moving forward. Obviously, this is some interesting news because Chris Paul has been one of the centerpieces to the organization ever since the Suns traded for him in 2020. He's been a great presence for guys in the locker room and has really helped a lot of the young guys develop into the consummate professionals that they are. But I think it's a conversation worth noting because Chris Paul is now 38 years old. He's going to be 39 in May of next year. And it looks like Father Time is starting to catch up to him just a bit. So, with that all being said, Logan, what are your thoughts on the situation? Is this the end of CP3 in Phoenix? Or do you think that they could probably extend their options and maybe continue to see CP3 in a Suns uniform?
Yeah, it's crazy that like we're not even fully into the NBA offseason and we're already getting these uh smoke screens, if you will. Chris Haynes tweeted out and just my phone, I was actually at work at the time. So I couldn't fully check my phone, but I just seen the notification, Chris Paul waived by Phoenix. And I was like, I mean, I guess even if that does happen, I won't necessarily be surprised, but just to actually see that and be like, dang, is Chris Paul not on the Suns anymore? It was pretty crazy at first, but obviously, an hour or two later, we, got the Shams and Woj tweet that, said nothing yet, just conversations, everything's on the table. And I think everything still is going to be on the table for a little bit longer. I don't know if Chris Paul is going to be on the Suns. The one thing I can say that I'm pretty confident in is that if he is on the Suns, it is not going to be on the current contract that he has, which is the $30+ million contract. I think if Chris Paul is going to be back on the Suns, it's going to be the whole wave and stretch stuff. I'm not too familiar with. I'd have to look more into that and how that works financially. But I think if Chris Paul is going to be on the Suns next year, it's going to be under a different contract, which would mean that the Suns would waive and then sign him back to a less expensive contract, which I think from what we've been hearing sounds like it seems like that is a pretty likely option because, in Woj's article, he mentioned that, Chris still wants to be here. He likes the idea of playing with Devin Booker, Kevin Durant. So I think his heart is still in Phoenix, and if he wants to win a championship, which, I would assume he does, that's all he's about right now. I feel like Phoenix gives him a really good opportunity to do that. Is he going to be back? It remains to be seen, but if he is, I feel pretty confident in saying that's not going to be on a $30 million contract.
Well, that's a really good point. And you know what, Logan, I'm right there with you because at this point, Chris Paul is at a stage of his career where it's like you can't be paying a guy who is 38 years old and has been prone to injury, especially last season, this type of amount of money. And I think, if I'm Chris Paul and I'm looking at this situation, I'm weighing my options. And the options are, do I want to continue to be a starting point guard in this league? Or do I want to go and win a championship? And if his main priority is going to be to continue to remain a starting point guard in this league, then I don't think that he's going to return to the Suns. But if he wants to win a ring, then I could still see him being on this franchise. And the reason why is because I think that Chris Paul only comes back to the Suns if he's willing to go and accept a much lesser role. Because in my personal opinion, as much as I love Chris Paul and as much as I respect him, I don't think he's really a bona fide starter in this league anymore compared to what he was early on in his career and even dating back to a couple seasons ago. We kind of saw a little bit of a drop off in last season where he really, you've seen him getting to his spots in the past. I mean, he would go ahead and knock down a lot of those mid-range jumpers. And at this point, or this time around, like he really didn't seem to really do that as much as he did in the past. So if I'm the Suns, I mean, having Chris Paul be your backup point guard on the team and really be the one to be in charge of leading your bench, I think it'd certainly be an option. I think it just all depends on like if Chris Paul is willing to do that.
I definitely agree with that. I think one name that a lot of people have been like mentioning on Twitter in terms of Chris Paul being back is what Kyle Lowry has done with the Heat. You know, Kyle Lowry has, for his whole career, for the majority of his career, he's been wherever he's been at, he's been the starting point guard. You know, he was the face of the franchise in Toronto. And even during that time with the rise, during their finals run with the rise of Fred VanVleet, Kyle Lowry was still in the starting lineup no matter what, no matter how well Fred VanVleet was doing. You know, they would everything would go around Kyle Lowry. Now he gets to the Heat. Even at times this year, he was their starting point guard, but you know, he has started to decline in his role, and they ended up moving him to the bench. And obviously, it's not looking good for Miami right now. But I mean, having Gabe Vincent in that starting role, Kyle Lowry running the bench has been great for them. So if Phoenix is able to, and like Gabe Vincent isn't, he's not some superstar, all-star level point guard, but if you can just have a guy who fits with the other four guys in the starting lineup well and have Chris Paul come off the bench, like that can end up being a great fit for the Suns. So if that all depends if Chris is willing to take that type of a role. He seems like the guy at this point that would be, just because he's all about getting that first ring. So yeah, I think if he's able to take that, you know, 6-man run the bench unit type of role, I think that would be really good for the Suns.
Very good point, bro. Moving on now, staying with the Suns, Frank Vogel also had his introductory press conference this past week, and there was a lot to like there. He said that he wanted this team to be scrappy as hell. He almost, in a sense, kind of gave me Paul Westphal vibes because, of course, Paul Westphal, former player for the Phoenix Suns in the 70s and early 80s, and he was also the head coach of the 92-93 team that made it to the finals and lost 6 games to the Bulls, and then was also the head coach of the team for 2 seasons afterwards. I'll tell you what, I am continuing to like Frank Vogel more and more. And I guess the reason why I wasn't too high on the hire at first was because obviously I don't really think I knew too much about him, but he has really come in and just set a great tone, I think, in his introductory press conference. You can tell that he wants to be here. And I thought that it was really interesting, too, because he mentioned how much he loved that 92-93 Suns team and just about how that team basically stole his heart as a basketball fan. Um, so yeah, I think certainly a lot to like there from Vogel, and I also like the addition of David Fisdale on the roster as well. So yeah, lots to like there from the new Suns head coach.
Yeah, definitely. I think you mentioned Fizdale. I think they're starting to, you know, put together a pretty solid coaching staff. I know we've lost a couple guys to Monty Williams in Detroit. I believe Mark Bryant and Jarrett Jack still up in the air, but there's rumors that he might be heading there too. So with those two guys gone, it's nice to see that they've added some, obviously retaining Kevin Young, which we talked about in the last episode. and also hiring Fizdale. So they're putting together pretty good staff, I would say. As far as the press conference, it's always kind of hard to analyze press conferences, like because unless you're just like some super like high like charismatic type of guy, like in the NFL, like with Dan Campbell, you're really not gonna like, I don't want to say like you're not gonna learn too much, but he's not gonna like give away everything you want to know. Like, obviously got a lot of questions about the future of DeAndre, and it's like, Frank Vogel is not going to be like, oh yeah, we're probably going to look to trade him. Like he's just not going to say that. So obviously he's going to say, he's excited to work with them, very talented, all that type of stuff. Kind of expected to hear that no matter what. I don't think that means like guaranteed that Aiton's back with the team. I think there's still, going to be a lot of discussions had about him. But yeah, it was encouraging to hear, kind of his philosophy on how he's going to run, his defense. And I think it was good to hear that he's been in touch with both Booker and Durant. They're like kind of in that dead period where there wasn't any like news or anything. Everyone's like, how's Booker going to feel about Vogel? He pushed for Young. I think some of that was kind of blown out of proportion. I don't think it like Booker was going to be upset if it wasn't Young. Obviously, he's not upset. He's fine with the hire. So that was encouraging to hear that they've been speaking ever since the hire. And I'm excited to see how the rest of the staff fills out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, going back to your point as well on DeAndre Ayton, look, there's certainly, I think, if you're looking at any of the guys that are on this roster currently right now, he's the one that I think certainly has the most questions that are surrounding him because obviously, like the Suns were, I mean, there were reports last offseason that the Suns were looking to trade Ayton. And now, I mean, his name once again is brought up because you look at just the way that he performed in the playoffs and he didn't have, I think, like the postseason that I think a lot of Suns fans had hoped he would. Um, but I think it's certainly a lot to like, I think, from just his energy and his willingness to be here and take this franchise to new levels. And I think that, him being also with James Jones as well that's going to be another great head coach general manager duo because you can tell that both of these guys really want to go and bring the Suns their first championship. You also add that on top of the guy like Matt Ishbia, who has said on the Burns and Gambo show this past week that he will do whatever it takes to win. He said that money will follow in the future, but it's great to see that. I mean, obviously, now you have a fresh new core in place with a great head coach, a great GM, and a great owner who's willing to spend on the organization. It should be hopefully a pair that really delivers this team its first championship. Although there's a lot of holes on this roster that certainly need to be filled in order for them to do that.
For sure. I think going back to Aiton a little bit, I actually saw this on Twitter, so I don't know who it was. So I apologize. I'm not able to, give credit to them, but I thought it was an interesting take where going back all the way to the decision to draft DeAndre, and I think a lot of people who were against that pick at the beginning was because of the center position kind of going away a little bit. That was the start of this small ball era, and like people weren't super high on taking a guy number one overall that was in a dying position. But now that like you look at it, bigs like having a dominant big is like becoming like a popular trend, like a winning formula now. What you look at what Giannis did with the Bucks, what Jokic is doing now. Obviously, we haven't seen him play in the NBA yet, but with Victor Wembanyama coming into the league, so I feel like the thought was, or they had the Suns had the right idea taking Ayton, whether that was an unpopular decision or not, because you see what having a dominant force, a dominant big, you see what type of success that can get you. So whether Frank Vogel's able to get that out of him or not, I think if there's anyone who can Ayton, there is definitely potential is there. Like we've been saying that his whole career. I still believe that. I don't know if it's going to end up being tapped into with the Suns, but if he is here with the Suns, I really hope that Frank is able to get that out of him.
I agree with you 100%, Logan. I think that that's a great point that you made. And for me, when it comes to DeAndre Ayton, look, I wanted him from the moment that the Suns got the first overall pick. And the reason why was because of that very issue. They needed a center. And I said this on last week's show. I mean, when you have a guy coming out of the University of Arizona who was getting comparisons to David Robinson and Wilt Chamberlain and averaged right around 20 points and 10 rebounds and was pretty darn efficient, why hesitate on pulling the trigger on a guy like DeAndre Ayton, especially when you see the raw athleticism and potential still being there? Um, and obviously, like with DeAndre being here, I think that a lot of Suns fans feel a bit disappointed by him because sometimes he doesn't live up to their level of expectation. But also at the same time, too, you have to acknowledge the fact that he is still a really talented center, but I think he just needs the right head coach. And I'm going to echo the same exact thing that I said on last week's show. As much as I love Monty Williams, he was not the right head coach for DeAndre Ayton because he didn't channel his inner that inner motivation, or he didn't channel that inner dog that we know that DeAndre Ayton is capable of playing, because we've seen it where he can be that 20 point, 20 rebound guy on a nightly basis. He had a little stretch of that right after the Suns traded for Durant, like right around mid-February, where DA was just on its complete tear. And so I think, with Frank Vogel, especially since he's been a head coach, and you look at some of the guys that he's coached, again, I mean, Roy Hibbert when he was in Indiana, Nikola Vucevic when he was in Orlando, Anthony Davis when he was with the Lakers. That's why it makes it. I mean, I know like getting a trade package deal for DeAndre Ayton and pieces to follow certainly would be nice, but you also can't undermine that the Suns got a head coach in Frank Vogel who is also known for developing centers and making them reach their full potential, so to speak. Staying with the Suns here, there was an interesting rumor that popped up that I think it's important for us to talk about. And that is the rumors surrounding James Harden potentially wanting to be on the Phoenix Suns. Now, according to John Gambadoro of 98.7 FM Arizona Sports, he said that don't believe the rumors, they're not true, and the likelihood of James Harden to the Suns is pretty much a pipe dream. I probably echo the same sentiment that Gambo does, that James Harden to the Suns is likely a pipe dream. But I think it's still cool to at least dream of that scenario where you have a backcourt of Devin Booker and James Harden, followed by Kevin Durant. I mean, it's cool to at least dream, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. And classic Gambo there, just completely shutting it down. I mean, it's not it's funny that we joke about because like he's never wrong with this type of stuff. So I guess it's just not gonna happen. But I feel like it's still gonna be something that gets thrown around every once in a while, especially when we get, into the peak or the start of free agency. Obviously, it would be amazing to have James Harden on the Suns. But yeah, like you said, I don't really see that. I don't see that happening. James Harden is an amazing basketball player, but with the way that the Suns are put together right now, money wise, I don't think it's smart to have James Harden as your other max level player. I think when you look at the success that the two teams in the finals have right now, the Heat and the Nuggets, they have their two guys, Nuggets, Jokic and Murray. Heat have Butler and Adebayo. After that, like every single guy, with the exception of a couple, because no team is perfect, but every guy down the line on both teams are a guy that you can rely on consistently. You have with the Nuggets, Aaron Gordon is he's going to guard your best player every night, and he's also going to contribute on offense a little bit. The Heat, they just go down the line, especially with Vincent and Duncan Robinson, Max Strus, even Kevin Love can contribute still a little bit. My point here is that the Suns have their two guys, and they're a pretty good two guys to have with Booker and Durant. So if they're just able to not just throw another 30 to 40 million at another guy, but have a bunch of guys, anywhere from 8 million to 20 million that you can count on come playoff time to not to contribute on both ends of the floor. With the Suns, one thing that, caught up to them is that they have a lot of guys who are good at like one or two things. Okogie, obviously excellent defender, but come playoff time, he's just not really going to be in the rotation because of his liabilities on offense. Same thing with guys like Torrey Craig. Obviously, he's a great guy to have on your team, but in the starting lineup, sometimes not always the best. Same thing goes for Landry Shamet, kind of the opposite of those two guys, where when he's on, his thing is that he should be able to contribute on offense. That hasn't always been the case for Shamet, but my point is that the Suns I think they can build a really good team surrounding Booker and Durant, and not Booker, Durant, and another superstar, and then a bunch of guys who you just don't really know what you're going to get from.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And look, I think that for the Suns, going back to just what you were saying, and really, this is exactly what they were saying on Arizona Sports as well, on Burns and Gambo, that for the Suns, like you just said, I'm going to circle back to your point where you mentioned about like having both D Book and Kevin Durant on your team. Yeah, those are two fantastic guys to have on your team. I mean, that's like a pairing made in heaven right there. And we got a really good dose of that, I think, in the playoffs to see just like how lethal the pair were in really, I think, keeping the Suns afloat in a lot of their playoff series, or in both of their playoff series, I should say. Um, but yeah, I think like it's important for the Suns to go and build this team with guys who, like you said, can contribute. I mean, that's part of like how Miami, I mean, is so successful right now is because you have your bona fide superstar in Jimmy Butler, and then you have Bam Adebayo, who he is an all-star center, but then it's like you also got guys on that too. Like, I mean, you've got Gabe Vincent, who is also another good role player, Max Strus, who can really knock down threes, Duncan Robinson, even though he's been kind of lacking a little bit, he's also still known to really shoot the three ball at a high level. And then, like you mentioned, Kevin Love. I mean, he was always a solid role player for Cleveland. He wasn't a guy that, I mean, it's like you consistently had to go and rely upon to score the basketball, but he still is one guy where it's like he can pull up from three when he needs to. He can go up and he can go down low and get those tough boards and push guys in the paint. So that's exactly like what I'm kind of looking for. And it kind of just fits the motto of what I think Frank Vogel said in his introductory press conference, that he wants guys that are not only going to get after it on the court on a nightly basis, but he wants guys that are going to be scrappy. And that's certainly, I think, a lot of guys, that certainly, I think, fits the mold for what the Heat are right now, because they have a lot of scrappy guys who can get big buckets when they need to go and help their superstars so that they don't go ahead and do all the scoring on a nightly basis. Because that's exactly what I think was the issue with the Suns, was that they were too reliant upon Booker and Durant getting most of their points, especially in the playoffs. And that turned out to be a complete failure. So just the game plan for the Suns going into this offseason is finding competent role players to go and build around Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, while also addressing other needs as well. Like we just mentioned beforehand, the point guard position, I think, is one that would certainly be a need of upgrade, but we shall see. We shall see. All righty, moving on to another Valley sports team, the Arizona Diamondbacks. They just took their 3-game series against Detroit, won it 3 games to none. won their last game of the season today, 7-5, after initially being down 5-2. Logan, I can't say enough great things about this Diamondbacks team. I mean, the grit and the swagger that this team has is special.
Yeah, it definitely is special. Words just can't even describe how fun this team is to watch. I thought before the season, I thought they'd be fun to watch, but I didn't know if that would translate into wins just yet. And now they're fun to watch, and it is translating into wins. So, yeah, they're having a great start to the year. Obviously, atop the NL West. Dodgers continue to lose games. That was kind of a couple weeks ago. Even though the D-backs were hot, the Dodgers were also winning games. So we weren't really making any ground, but now we are, and we are. I believe as of right now, it's 3.5 game lead, top the NL West, which is just awesome to say. It's always good to be in front of the Dodgers in the standings, whether it's first place or second to last, because then the Dodgers will be in last. But yeah, it's been a great start. I put this on my Twitter after the game, where that last win against the Tigers, like those are the games that great teams win. They were out of it for the most of the game. I believe it was 5-2 in the eighth. And then all of a sudden, they just start stringing their hits together, and they end up taking the lead in the ninth and holding it down. Unlike last week's episode where we came on after the blown save to the Braves. Yeah, it's been a great start to the year. It was a great win today. Obviously, Gallen didn't have his best stuff, but when you're able to win, when your best guy doesn't have his best stuff, that's what playoff teams do. They do whatever it takes to win. Just been a great start. Their schedule continues to be pretty winnable. So, I expect them to, keep building on this NL West lead and head right into the All-Star break.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, look, it's incredible just watching this Diamondbacks team and seeing how poised and resilient they are. And I like it how Steve Berthume and Bob Brenly and Gonzo on the Valley Sports broadcast team call this team the answer backs, because that's exactly what this team is. I mean, the way that this team is able to go and answer back every time that they're down, especially considering for how young they are on top of it as well. I mean, you've got some veteran guys in the lineup, like you've got Gurriel, you've got Christian Walker, you've got Rojas, but then it's like you also look at guys like Jake McCarthy and Corbin Carroll, even like, Emmanuel Rivera as well. The It's a great mixture of veteran guys and young guys on this team that really seem to have a close bond together, which hopefully should be continue to be a good winning formula for this team moving forward. Because I'll tell you what, it's Arizona is an excellent, I mean, outside of it being an awesome, like if we're talking Phoenix in general, outside of it being a great basketball town, you can't forget that the Diamondbacks won the World Series in 2001, especially when nobody expected them to. And I remember there was this question that came up on Valley Sports Arizona, where it's just like, would you rather see a Diamondbacks player win an MVP, or would you rather see them get another ring? And I'm just like, give me another ring, please, because look, they deserve it. And out of all the Diamondbacks teams, over the years that we've had to watch, it's great to finally have one that really does look like a serious contender, because it's been a long time coming.
Definitely. And you mentioned the question brought up by Valley Sports on if they would rather have an MVP or a ring. Speaking of MVPs, I think it is time that we start the Corbin Carroll for MVP campaign. This whole year we've been talking about, he's the favorite for the rookie of the year. Obviously, it looks like unless Ellie De La Cruz for the Reds catches fire, it looks like Corbin Carroll's about to run away with this rookie of the year. But I think it's time to start the MVP train for Corbin Carroll. This is as of yesterday, so it doesn't include his multi-hit game today. But this is from Valley Sports Arizona's Twitter. In his last 15 games, he has a 390 average, 6 home runs, 15 runs scored, 16 runs driven in, 5 stolen bases, which is over a 1200 OPS. I mean, this guy is electric, dude. Like he I am so glad that he is on our team. I'm so glad that we finally have one of these top prospects who actually delivers. Um, that that's been the one thing that I don't know if this is something with Torey Lovello or just kind of a bad luck organizational type thing, but the D-backs have had a lot of top prospects come through who just really haven't delivered, and Corbin Carroll is finally doing that. I think that might just be an exception because Corbin Carroll is just, that he's just awesome. He's so good. Um, but yeah, he is so fun to watch. He's so talented. Obviously, we knew he was fast, but now he's just slugging home runs every game. And I think obviously he's the favorite to win Rookie of the Year. I think he should be the favorite to start the All-Star game in the outfield. And he is making his case in this first half of the year to be in that MVP race.
I completely agree with you there. I think that he 100% should be in the MVP conversation because if you look at just how he has not only been able to get it done offensively as well, but he's also made some incredible defensive plays as well. I mean, anytime if you put him at left field or center field and there's a ball that's coming his way, there's a time where I mean, we've seen like a few of the incredible diving catches that he's made to just go up there and get it or go down low and slide to go and get it. This guy is just the complete package. And like you said earlier about just like the speed that Corbin Carroll brings, I've never seen a guy run the bases as well as Corbin Carroll has. I mean, it's just like for a fact that if he has like a base hit into right field that is probably going to be like more like shallow right, you at least know that he's going to be digging for second, which for most guys, that's probably one that they would most likely get a single out of. But like for him, because his speed is just so unbelievably incredible, he uses that to his advantage, and that just makes him the type of lethal player that he is.
I saw this on Twitter earlier today, but there's only been 2 players that have won Rookie of the Year and MVP in the same season. I can't remember who the first one was, but the second was Ichiro, which is pretty cool because I think that's one of the guys that Corbin kind of looks up to, models the game after.
Yeah, that's actually true. Yeah, because Ichiro won it in 2001, which was the year that the Mariners set the most wins in the regular season for any MLB team,
That's right.
and because I think he actually led the league in hits that year as well, which that's a great guy to certainly model your game after, the great Ichiro Suzuki. So now that we basically just like delved into all of the positives for the Diamondbacks, I want to go and stick to the topic of the Diamondbacks, but I want to go and focus on their needs because while it's cool looking at the amazing start that they've been on up to this point, you still look at the roster and there are a few gaping holes that are out there. And I mean, you start to look at maybe adding potentially another starting pitcher or maybe even potentially shoring up that bullpen. In my personal opinion, I think that it would be nice for them to certainly get that reliever because if you look at guys like Miguel Castro and Andrew Chafin have mostly been their guys to go and close out games. And Lavello has said early on that he's going to weigh their closer out as just it being a committee early on. But it's certainly something that I don't think is the best thing not to have going into the playoffs if you're really serious about making that playoff run. So I'm curious to really look at a few guys here about who the Diamondbacks could potentially be in looking at the deadline. If you look at guys, I'm looking at it maybe like potentially a Aroldis Chapman would be a great one, given that he has had postseason success. He did win a World Series with the Cubs in 2016, and he's a guy that can really throw a hard fastball. I mean, when anytime you have a fastball, thrown by uh, Aroldis Chapman, and you're a guy that's up to bat, good luck. So maybe a Roldis Chapman. I was even looking at another one too, which I was having a conversation with our good buddy Steven, and he mentioned a guy that I thought would also be intriguing in Alexis Diaz of the Cincinnati Reds. Right, I checked his ERA, and I think it was right around like 184 or something like that, which is absolutely insane. So I'd probably say that. And then if you're looking at maybe potentially like starting pitchers, we talked about this, I think, last week about maybe there potentially being guys like Shane Bieber on the market, maybe even potentially Cease of Chicago. So I think because I look at the Diamondbacks and it's like obviously Gallen and Kelly are your two main starters, but then you start to look down the line and you have Zach Davies, Tommy Henry, Ryan Nelson, and with all due respect to those guys, Henry I think is one guy you got to have in your starting rotation, but the other two in Davies and Nelson, it's a bit questionable. So I certainly, it'd certainly be something that if I'm the Diamondbacks, I'd look into. But I'm curious to get your thoughts, Logan. What do you think the Diamondbacks should do?
We talked a little bit about it on the last episode about, upgrading the bullpen, getting another starter. So those are definitely like I think the D-backs come trade season they're always going to be in the mix on some of those bullpen arms, some of the starters. But to kind of look outside of those two needs, I think another one that this team can definitely upgrade on, and I don't know like what position it would be, but obviously with the DH now, that makes things a little bit easier. But I think this team could definitely use another power bat in the lineup. That's one thing that I don't want to say they've struggled with because obviously you have this power surgence of Corbin Carroll recently. Gurriel has been hitting a lot of home runs. Obviously, the power ability of Christian Walker. But I think if they were able to insert another power bat into that lineup, it would be I think that would be much needed. You saw the D-backs have had their success of acquiring power bats at the deadline. We saw what JD Martinez did for us a few years back, just absolutely carried the lineup for the second half of the season. So I think that's definitely a spot in the offense that they could upgrade. As well as, the starters and relievers that we kind of touched on. Obviously, you touched on it now, and we also both touched on it last week too.
Yeah, that's a good point about certainly. I mean, it'd be nice for them to certainly add that extra power hitter. And look, I know that the whole philosophy in baseball is that in order to win a championship, you have to have three solid pitchers and then maybe a solid hitting. But also, I mean, we've seen that last year where, like, look at the Phillies. They basically went in there with not the best, not like, the brightest of starting rotations, but they had an elite offense because he had guys on that team like Bryce Harper and Nick Castellanos and Reese Hoskins, guys that Kyle Schwarber even too, guys that were just excellent, excellent power hitters. And so, yeah, it'd certainly be nice for the Diamondbacks to maybe potentially looking into adding another one of those bats to the lineup that can get you more consistent hits and more runs. Because, I mean, right now, the Diamondbacks probably could get away with maybe having the starting rotation of Gallen, Kelly, Nelson, Davies, and Henry. But it's also there's kind of a little bit of like dark clouds that kind of still surround it as well. Because, I mean, we obviously know how elite Kelly and Gallen are, but then it's like, again, you start looking down that rotation and those guys just really haven't proven themselves, at least for me personally, as being trustworthy to rely upon in crucial game situations. So I think, in my personal opinion, yes, definitely, I would love to see them add like another power bat to the lineup. But I got to go pitcher here, and maybe that's playing it a bit safe. But look, we've seen it at least with the Diamondbacks where they have had like obviously like that second or third guy that they've always been missing in their rotation, which has come to plague them from time to time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we saw it back in 2017 when they got swept by the Dodgers. Obviously, they got the wild card game, but didn't have success against the Dodgers. at that year, Greinke and Robbie Ray were their two guys. Both of those guys actually pitched in the wild card game, so they rolled out. I believe Taijuan Walker started game one, and I actually don't know if he survived the first inning. So you definitely want to have. I mean, that year we thought we had a pretty solid rotation. Walker had a good year. Patrick Corbin had a good year. But obviously playoffs are just a different beast. So obviously you want to have guys that you're gonna rely on when you're not able to give the ball to your ace and Zach Gallen, or give the ball to your number two and Merrill Kelly. Obviously they can't go every day. Playoffs, they're gonna be a little bit more available in terms of pitching on short rest, but obviously you're not going to be able to roll those guys out every single day. So you want to be able to have guys at the back end that you can rely on, and guys in the bullpen as well. So, last week and this week, kind of just talking about needs, not as many names. Once we, get a little closer to the deadline, we will definitely start hammering on some specific players that we would be intrigued for the D-backs to go out and get.
Good stuff, man. Absolutely. Moving on to the third Valley sports team of this podcast that we will be discussing, and one that we really didn't get a chance to discuss last week, and that is the Arizona Cardinals. Of course, their incredible series that they have called Flight Plan just dropped their new episode this week, and it really dived into Monty Austin-Ford's command of the War Room during the draft. Logan, I'm going to tell you something about this guy. I think it's no secret that the Cardinals are almost bound to struggle mightily this upcoming season, but I think it certainly provides a lot of optimism for the future, because if you just look at the difference in energy that both Austin Fort and even Jonathan Gannon bring, it's a lot different compared to Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury, especially like with Monty Austin Fort, because with him, the difference in philosophy, I think, that makes him stand out more than Steve Keim is that Austin Ford is looking to build the Cardinals back to prominence again through the draft. Whereas with Keim, he always looked to build up the Cardinals through free agency and maybe taking a chance on guys that were more towards like the tail end of their careers. And Keim had a few of them that were able to contribute with the Cardinals towards the tail end of their careers. I mean, you look at Chris Johnson being a guy. You look at John Abraham, some guys, that were able to at least contribute significantly. But that's only a formula that will only get you so far. And I mean, obviously, if we look at Steve Keim and the way that he has had just poor draft after poor draft after poor draft, I mean, it was unacceptable. And it ultimately, I think, caught up with the Cardinals to a point where it was hard for them to go and dig themselves out of that hole. So it's great to see Monty Austin-Ford be as aggressive as he is and be that type of guy where he's not going to take any crap from anyone. I mean, we saw it with DeAndre Hopkins where he was unable to get the type of deal that he wanted. And to really, I think, get the most out of every deal that he makes, it's great to have a guy like that who has that type of command and presence within your organization to go and make those type of decisions. And I think that the Cardinals should be in for a long time of hopefully having much more successful drafts than what they had under Steve Keim.
I I couldn't agree more. I think there's no sugarcoating things. The Cardinals are not going to be good this season. They're probably going to be one of the top 5 worst teams in the league. Maybe, I mean, a lot of people are. I mean, they're the favorites to be the worst team in the league. And we don't know if Jonathan Gannon is going to end up being a solid head coach. But one thing we do know is that it is a completely different vibe than the previous regime with Keim and Kingsbury. And I think that is what a lot of Cardinals fans were looking for. Yeah, we don't know how it's going to work out, but like I said, it's different. And you just spoke on it there, but the fact that Monty Austin-Ford is building this team through the draft is something that this team just desperately has needed in the past few years, and it finally caught up to them, which led to the firing of both the head coach and GM just 1 year after they were given extensions. Um, Still don't like thinking about that, but that's in the past now. We got Monty doing his thing. That Twitter that video of him that was on Twitter from the draft was spectacular. I watched that multiple times. It was so cool to see him not only fielding calls to move down, but then to move back up. And I put this on my Twitter, but I was like, show me Keim doing that. Like what? Like that was so different than what we've gone through in the past, and it was so cool. Obviously this is his first time being a GM, but to just see him work, like field all these calls on the clock too, like this is like he's on the clock, and he's talking with multiple teams, not only about moving down but then moving back up to get Paris Johnson. So I think that it's definitely encouraging to see a competent front office for the Cardinals. Like I said, they're probably not going to be very good this year, but that just means another high pick. And with the addition of the Houston Texans pick, it's going to be even more fun next year to see Monty and company kind of work the draft again and just keep bringing in the young talent. This team has hardly any of that. So it's gonna be rough, but the vision is there. And I think going back to Hopkins, a lot of people were upset about the Cardinals just not getting anything for him. For a guy as talented as DeAndre Hopkins, he's been one of the best wide receivers of the last decade. But so yeah, obviously people are going to be upset when you're not able to get anything in return for that. But like I said, like Monty, the vision is there, and that has been something that the Cardinals just have not had under previous regimes. So yeah, it stinks that they didn't get any picks, because that is what Monty is going to be utilizing in the future, is these draft picks. But the foundation is being laid. Yes, it's going to be a slow, long process, but the foundation is being laid. We're going to continue to build through the draft, build through the trenches, with the offensive and defensive line being an emphasis early on. And yeah, this year is gonna stink, but I'm excited to kind of look forward to what Monty's gonna build here.
Yeah. First of all, amazing, great points right there that you brought. I do want to bring up something though. I mean, obviously, like you said, and like I said previously, I mean, it's no secret that, yeah, we expect the Cardinals to be just absolute dog crap. But there is something intriguing that I do want to bring up though, and that is Clayton Tune, because I've heard reports that I've seen just from PHNX, and even DeAndre Hopkins said it before he got released, that Clayton Tune really started to impress at OTAs. And look at like his stats in college, and they weren't bad. I mean, he put up some good stats at the University of Houston. And sometimes, I mean, we've seen it with the 49ers last year, where Brock Purdy was able to thrive, even though he was like, Mr. Irrelevant in the draft. Now, obviously, there's a lot of varying factors behind that, in the sense that he had Kyle Shanahan as his head coach, who is an offensive guru. But it's at least, something that I think maybe we could be a little bit excited about, in the sense that maybe Clayton Tune could really give Colt McCoy a run for his money in really competing for that backup quarterback position. Because, we need something that we can at least be excited about. And maybe he can be a guy that, I mean, could surprise early on. And I was even listening to Bo Brock on the PHNX Sports podcast, that he said that, I mean, is he thought that Clayton Tune was going to be a guy that, I mean, he's not going to like wow you like Brock Purdy is, but I mean, he still could at least make it fun and at least watchable for us Cardinals fans, if he is given that starting role up until the point where Kyler comes back, which is probably going to be around midseason.
Yeah, definitely. I think like you said, there's not going to be a lot to look forward to with this team, but if Clayton Tune, obviously doesn't look like we're going to be starting the year with Kyler, we might it might be a majority of the season that we don't have Kyler. So, if Colt McCoy is struggling, obviously we got David Blau back. So if those guys, aren't cutting it, yeah, maybe, Clayton Tune gets a couple starts and shows some flashes. You mentioned Purdy. There's a lot of guys that are late round picks. Aren't expected to see the field. In their first couple of years, but they end up getting thrown in right away. You mentioned Purdy, also a guy like Gardner Minshew. Um,
Yeah.
had success in that type of role. So yeah, maybe Clayton Tune comes in, starts a couple games, wins a couple games. And you got obviously this isn't gonna be our franchise quarterback by any means, but yeah, maybe we could just have a cheap solid backup quarterback for a few years.
Yeah, that'd certainly be nice. I do want to actually circle back to the Cardinals prediction because I saw Adam Rank on NFL Network, and he predicted the Cardinals were going to go 2-15 on the season, which I'm just curious to get your thoughts. Do you think that's fair or unfair of Rank to make that type of assessment and prediction?
Okay, so looking at the schedule now, they start off the year with three straight NFC East. I believe NFC East opponents with the Commanders, Giants, and the Cowboys, and then follow that up with at the Niners, home against the Bengals, at the Rams. So yeah, I mean 2-15, that's a pretty bold prediction, even for as bad as the Cardinals are. Two wins is not a lot. Would it surprise me? No, it would not surprise me at all if the Cardinals won two games all year. But I feel like the thing with like these like heavy favorites to be the worst team in the league, at this point where we are now, it usually like it hardly ever goes that way. So I hope they are. I hope the Cardinals have the number one pick. Um, but I feel like it usually just is some team that, obviously isn't good, but then a couple other things pile on top of that to, put them into that worst team tier. Obviously, I don't no one expected the Bears to be good last year, but I don't think anyone was picking them to be the worst team. Everyone was talking about, how the Lions were going to be so bad. Obviously, that didn't happen. So, you never know, especially this far out from the season. You never know who's gonna be the worst team in the league. It's gonna take a few things to go wrong. And the Cardinals have a lot going wrong with this team, but 2-15, usually the worst team is, anywhere between four and 3, 4, 5 wins. So I definitely think the Cardinals are in that territory. So it's a bold prediction, but I don't think they'll have two wins, but I don't think it'll be much more, is what I'll say about that.
Yeah, I think if I'm going to set a ceiling for the team, it's probably more likely like, I mean, 5 or 6 wins because I mean you have teams like okay, Washington should be a winnable game for them. I mean the Giants is definitely I think going to be a tough one. The Cowboys one is going to be a tough one. And then you mentioned I think what was it, the Niners and the Bengals that they have coming up
Yeah,
afterwards?
Niners, Bengals. We'll just go through. So Niners, Bengals, and then week 6 is at the Rams. Week 7 is at the Seahawks. Week
Loss.
8 is home against the Ravens. And then weeks 9 and 10 are the Browns on the road, the Falcons at home, and then at the Texans, which that should be an interesting game.
Yeah,
With
very
us
interesting
having
game.
that might be a battle for the number one pick right there. And luckily we can't really lose in that situation because we have both picks there. So that should be a fun watch. And then week 12 is home against the Rams. 13 is on the road against the Steelers. And then it is home against the Niners, on the road against the Bears, and then on the road against the Eagles, and then the final game is home against Seattle. So I don't think it's not that crazy of a schedule, but it's definitely not easy. There's definitely some tough opponents in there. So, you know, these prediction videos always come up at the end of the year, just showing how bad they are. I don't think the Cardinals are gonna like make the playoffs or anything, but it's hard to make these win predictions this far out from the season. So obviously this whole segment we've been doing have been talking about how the Cardinals are going to be so bad, but I think 2 wins is a little strong.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we'll see. Then again, I mean, if we've noticed anything with the NFL, anything is possible, and you never know who's going to come on top. But I mean, at least for us Cardinals fans, it's pretty easy that they aren't going to be very good. Although, like you said, 2 wins is really setting the bar low, but maybe if they can be in that 5 or 6 win range, hopefully that could be like maybe something that could be a lot better compared to Adam Rank's prediction. Moving on to just some hockey news here. Shane Doan has left the Coyotes for the Maple Leafs to become the special advisor to the general manager. Donor obviously is a very important person, like, to the Valley here. He's Captain Coyote. He's done so much for the Coyotes organization and really just building up the sport of hockey in Arizona. This is a big time loss for them because obviously Shane Doan has meant everything to the Coyotes fan base and the state of Arizona. And to see him go off, somewhere certainly I think is disappointing. But really, I think what it speaks to is really if he like was able to go and accept this job in Toronto, I mean, obviously it's a great opportunity for him, but I just wonder, does this really speak to his confidence level in the Coyotes maybe possibly not staying long term in Arizona? I think it does. And the reason why is because right now the Coyotes, they had the Tempe Entertainment District plan obviously get shut down, and right now they're in scrambles to go and look elsewhere to go and build a new arena someplace around the valley, but they're having a tough time doing it. And I mean, look, with all due respect to the Coyotes and to hockey, as far as like, it goes on my sports totem pole, it's at the very bottom because while I followed the Coyotes loosely throughout my entire life, I just haven't followed them as in depth as others, but I still care about them. And the reason why is because they're still part of Arizona and Arizona sports. And they've also, I think, been the franchise where maybe outside of the Cardinals, they've really just been it's been a crap show with them because they have never been able to find a solid ownership. I mean, let alone even just like, a very select few of players that the fan base has been able to gravitate to. So, look, I just hope for the sake of all Coyotes fans and just hockey fans in general here in AZ that the Coyotes are going to be able to stay here in Arizona on a long-term basis because again, it's cool having four major pro sports franchises here in the Valley. And I mean, for the Coyotes as well, it would be great to see them win a Stanley Cup here in Arizona, just given that they've just gone through so much, dysfunction and disarray as an organization as a whole since they've been here in Arizona. So yeah, hopefully there can be some way, shape, or form that they're able to stay at least somewhere in the Valley metropolitan area, or if not, I don't even care. Move them up to Flagstaff, move them onto the Arizona border, Mexico border. I don't care, just as long as they're somewhere in Arizona, because that's all I care about at the end of the day. Alrighty, folks, thank you so much for listening to the Valley Experience. Alongside Logan Lober, I'm Ryan Pasiecznik. Make sure to tune in next week for all of the amazing takes we have on Valley sports. And with that, just keep on following sports.
Make sure to give our social media accounts a follow as well. They're going to be at the Valley XP, both Instagram and Twitter. We'll be posting news about the podcast, news about all the Arizona sports teams. But yeah, thank you guys all so much for watching. We will see you in the next one.